Hi folks, Carl James here from Electric Media Madness. Another review of Star Trek Picard for you today. I've got a little behind with my Picard videos of late, so I'm going to play catch up with this video and bring you two reviews for the price of one. I'll begin with a run through of episode 5, Stardust City Rag, and then jump into the most recent episode 6 entitled The Impossible Box shortly. But let's start with episode 5. It didn't bode very well for me following the disaster that was episode 4. Episode 5 is just as problematic as his predecessor, but for a whole different load of reasons. I will stress here that I found Stardust City Rag to be a tiny weeny bit of an improvement on Absolute Candor, but only in as much as it streamlined an A-plot story. It spared the viewers of the amateur theatrics of Soji and Narek and their so-called relationship that marred much of episode 4. Stardust City Rag opens with yet another flashback, something that's now pretty much par for the course with the narrative given for Star Trek Picard. Events begin 13 years ago at the Seven Domes colony of planet Vergesan. A Starfleet officer with Borg implants is being horrifically and very graphically tortured by a surgeon in order to remove his implants. Why they couldn't have beamed these implants out of this poor lad's body is anybody's guess. However, something like that would have spared the viewer of a gory, literally eye-popping in this case, introduction to the episode. Clearly the producers of the show wanted this spectacle on screen. All it does is serve as a reminder that Star Trek has irrevocably changed and not for the better. With a very few exceptions, Star Trek has been a show that's pretty much always been a wholesome family values show suitable for all ages. All ages of the family could watch it. This show, I would say, is definitely not for children or those of a sensitive disposition. So we follow this lad. He's been mutilated in burst 7 of 9. 7 shoots the surgeon and moves to comfort the chap, who we learn is Icheb, a fan favourite, semi-regular character from the days of Star Trek Voyager. Icheb begs 7 to put him out of his misery. Weepily she says, "I'm so sorry, my child," and then she shoots him dead. To reiterate, Icheb, a character much loved by many Star Trek Voyager fans, many Star Trek fans overall, is dispatched in the first minute of this episode in the most flippant and blasé manner. After 20 years absent from on-screen canon of the franchise, Icheb, the white male I might add, is back for a minute and then he's gone. Shades of John Connor in Terminator Dark Fate, anyone? To add insult to injury, it isn't even the original actor that's playing Icheb. The Icheb narrative scenario in this episode somewhat repeats itself with another character later in the episode, but I'll come to that shortly. After this opening, we jump forward in time to 2 weeks before the contemporary time frame of the show, and we are in a bar in Stardust City on Freecloud. We are introduced to the crime boss Bjayzl, who initially I mistook for a de-aged Deanna Troi, and her band of goons. Bjayzl has captured Bruce Maddox. Initially she plans to kill him, but then she learns that the Romulan Tal Shiar are after him. She changes her mind. Bjayzl bemoans the fact that she's now going to have to deal with the Tal Shiar, saying making a deal with the Tal Shiar is such a pain in the ass. As I've noticed in every other review of Picard, one of my numerous pet hates about contemporary Star Trek is the use of 20th and 21st century slang, terminology and that sort of phenomenon in the late 24th century. Here the example is pain in the ass. It's not the use of this kind of thing that I take issue with, rather that for almost 40 years most incarnations of Star Trek did not do this. The fact that it's now all of a sudden everybody seems to be doing it all the time. It's not only jarring, but it contradicts canon and begs the question, ignoring the lazy scripting of the show's writers, of course, why everybody has suddenly started using this kind of terminology. The next scene in the episode brings us back to the present aboard the La Serena, and we are with Picard in his holodeck recreation of his chateau. 7 of 9 enters, and Picard offers a presumably holographic drink. 7 asks for bourbon straight up because she's a real hard ass now, and downs the drink in one. She uses yet another example of somewhat contemporary language when she asks, "What the hell are you doing here, Picard?" Interestingly, somebody should ask 7 that question. It's never explained why she was in orbit of planet Vashti in the previous episode. Here it said that she was heading to Freecloud, yet the previous episode also established that Vashti is somewhat out of the way from Freecloud. 7 also reveals that she's now a Fenris Ranger, who, as Picard emphasises, takes the law into her own hands with regularity. 7 indicates that there are no effective laws now in the Trek universe, another example of undermining the positive future message that has, until fairly recently, been at the core of Trek mythology. 7 says that she is helping people who have no one to help them. Picard says he was looking for someone who, as he says, has no one else to help her. Someone who will likely die if I don't. With this, 7 instantly decides to join Picard's mission, no explanation for why. Raffi is on a computer looking up people on Freecloud and finds an entry about her son, Gabe. Rios enters and they talk about the fact that both Picard and Seven used to be Borg. Rios gives us a little feminine empowerment by reminding the viewer that Seven is, in his words, notorious. Dr. Jurati is in her quarters watching a holo vid of her and Bruce Maddox. We learn that they used to be a couple. She's smiling as she watches their interaction, but then she sheds a tear when she watches them kiss. The ship arrives at Freecloud and the bridge comes to life with personalised holo adverts for various businesses on Freecloud. How Freecloud knows how to personalise these adverts is anybody's guess. To remind us of her quirky and oh so funny character, Jurati gets a personalised advert where she's beaten up by a holographic robot, physically hitting her somehow by being hit by the hologram. Rios tells her that she has to punch the robot's head clean off his shoulders to make it stop. Eagle-eyed viewers will notice that this is yet another quasi-decapitation motif that's common in contemporary Star Trek. In any case, somebody on the production of this show clearly thought that this would be funny and a visually appealing gimmick here, adding more reminders that we are, as viewers, supposed to like Jurati. Jurati starts to laugh when she decapitates the hologram and Rios bigs her up. They high-five each other and Jurati starts to play punch fighting with Rios' shoulder. More contemporary 20th century human interaction here with the high-five. After his fairly lengthy introduction in the previous episode, Elnor, the white male, remember, is reduced to being the village idiot role here. He's buffoonishly realising that he hasn't got a holo advert of his own, saying, "I didn't get one." Raffi gets into the Freecloud mainframe and oh so conveniently for the plot, learns that Bjayzl is holding Bruce Maddox for ransom from the Tal Shiar. Seven looks disturbed when she sees the image of Bjayzl, saying she butchers ex-Borgs for parts. She's been high on the Rangers wanted list for years. After some back and forth amongst the crew, Raffi tells JL, which is a god-awful nickname by the way, that they are shit out of luck. As I've said in previous videos, swearing in contemporary Trek is as jarring and annoying as the use of 20th and 21st century slang in the future. Throughout the real history of Trek, people are rarely heard swearing in the future. Yes, it does occasionally happen, but it's a real rarity in the films and pretty much non-existent in TV shows of Trek. Now, everybody in Kurtzman Trek seems to be doing it at some point or another. At the conclusion of the aforementioned discussion, Seven suggests that they make it look like they are going to trade her for Maddox. We see Stardust City on Freecloud, which for all intents and purposes is a hologram-covered Las Vegas in space. A very tired cliche, I might add, in science fiction. Amongst the sights, we get a few member berries back to the earlier incarnations of Trek with signs for Mr. Mott's Hair Emporium, Mott being the Enterprise's resident barber on Star Trek Next Generation, and Quark's Bar, the resident Ferengi from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. The next section of the episode kicks off a weird and patchy style of editing that was used in an earlier episode of Star Trek Picard, episode 2 if I recall. One of the producers seemed to love this kind of editing. It creates all kinds of problems for both linear and story and narrative, and the patience of the viewer for that matter. The plan to infiltrate Bjayzl's operation and make a deal to get Maddox is initially revealed by dialogue delivered on board the La Serena. However, these scenes are intercut with scenes of the actual mission itself, the one they're describing, as it takes place on Freecloud. And I'm assuming that this is done because it's gimmicky, that those that work on the show seem to think that it looks cool. It isn't, by the way. It's annoying, and as with many things on Star Trek Picard, it's incredibly jarring. We begin with Rios dressed up as a pimp. He meets Bjayzl's principal thug, a Beta Anari sentient reptiloid called Mr. Vup. The deal is discussed. On board the ship, in the scenes that take place on the holodeck, we see Picard dressed as a pirate, complete with an eye patch, spouting all manner of cringeworthy cliches with a ridiculously exaggerated French accent. Quirky Jurati tells Rios that his pimp get-up is, as she says, killing it, which is another example of contemporary slang now used in Trek Future. Elnor, once again portrayed as the naive idiot, as he doesn't seem to get that this is all a cover, utilising disguises, and thinks that everybody is who they are pretending to be. Played for comic relief, but it undermines the initial setup of the character and serves to belittle a male role in the show. Rios is told to be careful when he meets Mr. Vup because he can, as Raffi puts it, smell when you are telling the truth, also what you had for dinner and the last person you had sex with. Rios retorts, if they're not the same thing. This leads to an interesting reveal in the subsequent Freecloud portion of the edit mishmash when Mr. Vup sniffs Rios and says he can smell smoked meat on his breath. I don't wish to get crude here, but I do unfortunately have to give a tad of detail here to those that don't know what I'm talking about, and thus to explain the implications of this very subtle sexual innuendo, because in some quarters of society, smoked meat is used as a euphemism for oral sex, specifically on male. I'll try to leave the rest of this for you to figure out, but suffice it to say that Mr. Vup says he can smell it on Rios's breath. This suggests something about Rios's sexual orientation. The subsequent scenes are a bit all over the place for the next few minutes. Patrick Stewart delivers some truly atrocious acting in his French mercenary guise. We have a throwaway line that the Romulan neutral zone is now gone, destroying another aspect of Trek canon in a matter of seconds, with no adequate explanation given as to why. Did the Romulan supernova incident wipe out the entire Romulan infrastructure and the Romulan fleet, meaning that they couldn't maintain the zone? As a viewer, I have so many questions watching this show, but as of yet, the writers have provided no answers. Raffi gives us a dollop more female affirmation when she tells Seven that she admires the work that she does as a ranger. Elnor imitates the village idiot yet again when he finally twigs that, as he says, "It's a lie, everybody is behaving as if they were somebody else." We later get another bash of Elnor when he says, "I don't know how to be Elnor." Picard replies, "Then be Elnor." And then Seven retorts, "The Elnor who never talks." In other words, be a good little boy and shut up, Elnor. Quirky Jurati gives us presumably some more likability to a character when she gets all worked up about being responsible for beaming everybody out from the mission. She acts as if she doesn't know how to operate the transporter, something that doesn't quite ring true when we have already been reassured on several occasions that she's a technical and scientific genius. Surely a transporter wouldn't be a problem for her. It's a poorly thought out aspect of the character and this scene on the part of the writers, and it serves as a gimmick, nothing more really, to further endear the character to the viewer. This is very much the template for what Kurtzman et al. Did with the character of Tilly on Star Trek Discovery. Actually, if you do a little checking, you'll find that all the writers that have acquainted themselves with the proverbial JJ Brigade school of television and filmmaking have written the Jurati, Tilly type characters into most of their TV shows and many of their films. Although this is something of a standard trope in TV and filmmaking, it's an overused standard for those members of the JJ Brigade. We then learn that Raffi is not going on the mission, as she is going off in search of her son on Freecloud. Before she beams off the ship, Picard gives her another little bit of female affirmation. He tells her that this is going to be very much harder without you. On Freecloud, Raffi locates her son and learns that he's married, and he and his wife are expecting a child. She's also a Romulan, by the way. We learn that Raffi pretty much estranged herself from her family, and even though it appears that she is the one who abandoned her family and therefore to blame, her son is portrayed as a right dick in these scenes. The underlying message here is that it can't be the woman who's to blame in contemporary Star Trek. Raffi has been a heavy drinker and drug user, and her obsession with a conspiracy at the heart of Starfleet seems to have been the cause of the family split here, but Raffi is portrayed as the character that the viewers must sympathise with, that she wants to put things right with her son. Even though she won't back down on her belief that there is a conspiracy in Starfleet, the son is presented to the viewer as pig-headed, detached, unrepentant, and ultimately unsympathetic as the character. Raffi leaves when Gabe rejects her. In amongst these scenes, we also get a convenient plot info dump when Gabe mocks Raffi's conspiracy revelations. He says to her, "Tell me how it wasn't the synths. Tell me about the Conclave of 8. Raffi concludes this reveal with the lines, "That attack was not what it seemed. There is a conspiracy and it's bigger than anybody knew." I'm sure we'll find out, well I'm assuming we'll find out more about this, particularly the Conclave of 8 in a later episode, but for now, the lazy writers are just dialogue dropping it once, and they seemingly forget. They will do this until it's conveniently needed again, presumably. One final point to note in these scenes, Gabe says to Raffi, "It sucked to be your kid." Sucked is yet another example of contemporary terminology now used in Star Trek. Back with the mission to rescue Maddox, Picard and Elnor present Seven to Bjayzl, and it's implied that the pair were in a relationship at some point in the past. Bjayzl calls Seven impressive and goads Seven about when she, and as she puts it, carved up her little friend, meaning Icheb. She then calls Seven by her original name, Annika, and reiterates their close personal relationship, as she puts it. The plan goes a little awry when Seven reveals that she joined the mission in order to find Bjayzl to kill her, and grabs Bjayzl around the throat. Bjayzl's goons are gunned down, leaving her unprotected. Elnor displays more idiocy when he exclaims, "Are we still pretending?" and Picard sighs dismissively, "No, Elnor." Seven tells the others to take Maddox and leave. She then bashes Starfleet and the Federation, another of many examples of this message of how bad the Federation is in the show, I might add. Gives us a preachy speech about how the Federation abandoned everybody and that Egypt was as close as anybody has ever been to her. She name drops Voyager at this point and how Icheb came to be with Seven. We learn that Bjayzl was posing as a ranger and trying to help Seven, but that it was a ploy to get close to Seven to get access to Icheb and his Borg implant technology. Why she didn't just go straight for capturing Seven and getting her implants all those years ago is anybody's guess. A plot inconvenience, I suppose. Rios then tells Seven that he understands her need for revenge, but says that if she does it, Picard and Elnor, or the kid and the old man as he puts it, will be hunted by Bjayzl forever. Interestingly, Rios portrays the only two white male characters here as the most vulnerable and seemingly the least unable to protect themselves, even though it's already been established that Elnor is a superior warrior. Bjayzl offers a trade, her life in exchange for Bruce Maddox. They all seem to go for this and beam away with Maddox. On the ship, Seven says that she's departing to rendezvous with the Rangers and takes a couple of phaser rifles with her. Before she beams away, she and Picard talk about being ex-Borg, and they agree that they never fully recovered their humanity as a result of their experiences. This seems to contradict established canon of Star Trek The Next Generation TV series with regard to Picard. Although that contradiction didn't begin here, it actually began in the film First Contact. This show has taken the idea to a much deeper level, and subsequently it undermines the fundamental nature of Picard as a character. Seven beams away, but returns to the bar where she left Bjayzl. Really hoodwinks Picard in these scenes here, because Picard, we get the expression on Picard's face that he knows that that's what she's going to do, but he lets her do it anyway. But in any case, she tells Bjayzl that Icheb was like a son to her, and then says this is for him, and then she murders her. Bjayzl's reinforcements arrive, but it's too late to save her, leaving Seven in a final scene of the episode blasting away with her phaser rifles at the reinforcements. Badass Seven. That's where we leave her in this episode. Back on board La Serena, Maddox tells Picard that the Tal Shiar came for him and destroyed his lab. Then he says that Dahj is Soji's sister, and Soji is on the captured Borg cube. He also says that he sent her there to find out the truth about the synth ban. He says they're hiding something. There are lies upon lies. Picard asks if he means the Romulans, to which Maddox replies, no, not just them. I think the Federation are involved. So we have more Federation bad here. Jurati tells Picard that Maddox is barely stable and needs to rest, so Picard leaves sickbay. Picard tells Rios to set course for the Borg cube. We also learn that Raffi's back on board, but she's locked in her quarters, presumably getting high or drunk or whatever. We go back to sickbay, and Jurati and Maddox appear to be glad to see each other. They talk about Dahj and Soji, to which Maddox adds, they are perfect, perfectly imperfect, whatever that line means. I did it soon, and I and your contribution was essential. Jurati then replies, the one thing I have to atone for. When Maddox asks what she means, she starts messing with the medical equipment and he starts to die. The EMH appears and witnesses some of this. That will presumably be a little plot device for later on, but Jurati then deactivates him. Maddox struggles to breathe. Jurati says, if only you knew what I know. I wish I didn't know what I know. I wish they hadn't shown me. I'm sorry. And then Maddox dies in a horrible and gruesome death. Again, Trek that isn't really appropriate for all ages nowadays. The blood vessels under his skin burst, his eyes burst, the blood in his eyes bursts, and he becomes all bloody. The episode ends with Jurati, no longer quirky I might add, standing over his body and crying. Remember that her turncoat nature was signposted way back in episode 2, I think it was. Poor writing, poor foreshadowing here. So, what can I say about Stardust City Rag? There are some very minor positives about it, but not many. Let's get them out of the way first. The episode certainly benefited from being a more streamlined story on this occasion. We weren't jumping to the Earth plots, or the Romulan refugee planet, or even events on the captured Borg ship in this episode. The story stayed pretty firmly with Picard and his crew, and was reminiscent, although I must stress only very slightly, of the old days of episode structure writing on Star Trek. We're spared of the god-awful love story between Soji and Narek in this episode, which was a definite tick in the plus column for me. We also got a fraction further forward in the story. I must stress that only a fraction, in as much as Picard and his crew now know that Soji is the sister of Dahj, that she's on the Borg cube, and that Picard and his crew are finally heading there. Beyond these points, there's a hell of a lot that is bad about this episode, moreover downright offensive. Let's start with the bad stuff. The identity politics of characterization overshadowed a hell of a lot of this episode, pretty much substituting it for plot at times. There were some truly dreadful acting moments in this episode. Patrick Stewart was particularly guilty of it in this episode. As I mentioned earlier, there were some questionable editing choices made throughout the initial setup of the Stardust City segment that severely distracted from the story. I'm also getting really fed up with the whole Federation Starfleet bad routine that's polluting this series. The fictional future of Star Trek is always sizably optimistic and hopeful. Gene Roddenberry and others that were involved with the past production of Star Trek recognised that one of the principal reasons why Star Trek had such a large fan base was because it portrayed a future that people aspired to. However unrealistically it may have appeared to be. Fans wanted that specifically. They wanted optimism. Star Trek has always given a lot of people hope, when most other TV shows and films have been pessimistic, dystopian and bereft of hope. Contemporary incarnations of Star Trek have no regard for the former vision of the Trek universe. This is one of the key components that not only makes Star Trek Picard sizably unlikable, but increasingly difficult to watch. It's like watching a kind, considerate and good-natured child growing up to be a narcissistic, vicious, psychopathic maniac. It almost breaks your heart, especially for somebody like me who is a dyed-in-the-wool past Star Trek fan. A case in point here would be the way several previously established Trek characters are dealt with. I've already covered this with Icheb, but I should also mention that the other example, Bruce Maddox, although the character wasn't exactly a fan favourite in Star Trek Next Generation, his single appearance in the show was in one of the most beloved TNG episodes, Measure of a Man. That episode informed so much of Data's character arc throughout Star Trek The Next Generation that the character was subsequently mentioned in a number of episodes of the show. Here, Maddox is pretty much unrecognisable. We even have a different actor who incidentally looks nothing like the original TNG Maddox, playing the part in Star Trek Picard. Differences motivated by aged or dead actors or even story requirements are one thing. The actors who played Zefram Cochrane in the original series of Star Trek and the movie First Contact look nor behave nothing alike. But changes to fundamental canon that are motivated purely by change for the sake of change are something entirely different. Let's not forget that Maddox is casually discarded in a fashion very similar to that of Icheb, now surplus to requirement. This long-established canon character also meets a brutal and gory demise. There may be a subliminal message here on the part of the writers that the past canon of Star Trek should be violently discarded. It's also not escaped my attention that both characters were effectively killed by women in this episode, Icheb by Seven and Maddox by Jurati, and presumably both people that loved the person that they killed. Now you can consider that a coincidence if you wish, but I don't. Although the treatment of Maddox and Icheb may appear something of a minor issue here, they are indicative of a much larger problem, the contempt that those currently writing and working on this show have for the past of the show, and by extension the fans of the show. One larger indication of this is the development of Seven of Nine. Seven really was an absolute fan favourite among Star Trek fans. Central to her popularity was her journey to reclaim her individuality and her humanity. It certainly appeared that by the time Star Trek Voyager had come to an end, the character had advanced significantly along the path of her aforementioned journey. She had a cortical inhibitor removed, allowing her to fully experience human emotions again. She even initiated a romantic relationship with Voyager's Commander Chakotay. Those fans who were expecting a happily ever after resolve to Seven's character were probably going to be disappointed regardless of whoever wrote the character back onto television screens. Yes, it would have been great to have seen the character in a command role on board a starship or leading a research team on some project to develop hyper-advanced technology for Starfleet, but what we ended up getting is so far away from fan expectations, and I actually feel confident in saying that Star Trek Picard's portrayal of Seven is a major betrayal of the character's entire past. I've heard people say of the established canon in this show, well, 20 odd years is a long time, people change, sometimes drastically. I do accept that. I myself am a very different person to who I was 20 years ago. Most people probably are. However, this is the real world that I'm talking about, and what we should be talking about here is fictional television. It should be a different set of rules. I'm not saying that writers should pick up a character exactly where they left off years earlier, but I do believe that a happy medium should be found between the aforementioned level of naivety and innocent character writing and the kind of pessimistic, cynical portrayals that we're getting in television today. What we witness in Stardust City Rag is emblematic of everything that is wrong with broadcast fictional television nowadays. It really is a truly sad state of affairs, particularly now that it's affecting a once carefully crafted and nurtured franchise like Star Trek. In conclusion, there's so much wrong with this episode, but strangely, it's a whole different kind of list of wrongs that I compiled whilst watching episode 4. Episode 4 was an example of how to make bad television today. Sadly, episode 5 says much more about how you undermine and destroy the good television of yesterday. My score for this episode is 1.5 out of 10. So let's move on to episode 6, The Impossible Box. This episode is an example of how Star Trek Picard seems to bounce up and down in quality like a yo-yo. On a personal level, it was definitely an improvement for me on the last 2 episodes. It seemed a bit more straightforward in terms of storytelling, and unlike the previous episode, didn't mash all over the established canon of Trek in such a fierce way. Yes, there were still plenty of things wrong with it, and it is far, far from perfect, but I came away from watching this episode with a 3-word summation: far less offensive. Is that a good thing, that something is not necessarily good, but it's just less offensive? I don't know. No doubt I've been coloured by the previous few episodes, but this one played far more into a few more positive notes that I've made about this show since it started. That there is a core of a good story idea here, however small it may be. This episode reconnected with that idea for the first time in several episodes, however I must add that it didn't take it very much farther forward story-wise. The episode begins with a dream sequence instead of a flashback for a change. We see a young Soji wandering around a darkened house during a storm. She's looking for Daddy. She reaches the study where her father is working. However, as she tries to see him, he shouts at her and the dream ends. A startled Soji awakes in her quarters on board the Borg cube. She's in bed with Narek, and we have another bout of soap opera style interaction between the two as Soji and Narek talk about her nightmares and what they might mean. Thankfully, this trite dialogue doesn't last very long as we start to get into the story, such as it is. Narek tells Soji that he knows, thanks to security surveillance, that she talks to her mother on a comm channel every night, and then he departs from her quarters. This seems to get her thinking, and she examines a photograph of herself, Dahj and her mom. On board the Lacerina, Jurati tells Picard that Maddox died because his heart gave out due to the trauma he'd been through and the effects of the drugs that he was taking to stay alive. Makes you wonder whether he believes that or not. Picard says he's not looking forward to going to the Borg cube, even though he's been on Borg cubes since his experiences as Locutus. He muses about his time as Locutus, and then he gets angry about the Borg, trying to riff on that infamous scene from the film First Contact, presumably. He goes to the holodeck and he begins researching the captured Borg cube, even though he knows loads about the Borg cube, but he does look into what kind of work is going on there. He learns that Hugh is the director of the Borg Reclamation Project and then sees a picture of himself as Locutus. On the upper deck of the ship, we have Rios playing footy, and Jurati appears, and she's once again moaning about how crap space is. She says, "Why do you like it out here? It's cold and empty and it wants to kill you." People think that about this show. Rios consoles Jurati about the death of Maddox, then they have a snog, then Jurati says that she has a superpower to sense mistakes when she's making them. Rios says that it's a crap superpower, which it's not even a superpower. She then lists a load of emotions that she's apparently feeling, although you get no indication of these feelings by the blank expression on her face. Then they have another snog. This is all classic feelings in hallways that Star Trek Discovery excels at. Finally, Jurati takes Rios by the hand off to his private quarters, or her private quarters, presumably to have sex. It seems, if that's the case, that she got over Maddox very, very quickly. His dead body has only been cold for a matter of, at the very least, hours, at most days. Back on board the Borg cube, Rizzo is in Narek's quarters. Narek tells her that he may have found a way to get the information he needs from Soji without triggering her super ability, programming, activation, whatever it is, by unlocking Soji's dreams. Rizzo is sceptical about this, but she allows him to proceed. On the Lacerina, the crew muse about how they can get on board the Borg cube. Apparently subterfuge won't work, so they decide to go with an honest and direct approach, which is getting Picard diplomatic credentials in order to get permission to work on board the Borg cube. Raffi comes onto the bridge, very stoned and pissed, and announces that she has an old captain friend in Starfleet who might be able to help. It's implied that there might have been a relationship between this contact and Raffi, but it's only alluded to. We get a major bash of Old Man Picard here when Raffi contacts her friend. She says, "You know, Picard, every part of that guy that's not ego is rampaging id." She then continues, "Picard's so Federation, his face is probably still on the damn brochures." Eventually, Raffi's friend agrees to get diplomatic access for Picard onto the Borg cube, but only for 24 hours. Despite the fact that Raffi has majorly insulted Picard here, he and the rest of the crew give Raffi a big round of applause for getting him access. It's a very cringy scene, made worse by the fact that Raffi gets a load of affirmation for just happening to know the right connection whilst being totally off her face. But she's a woman, it's all good. Rios helps her back to her quarters where she tells him what happened between her and her son Gabe when they met on Freecloud. But it doesn't go any further than that. On the Borg cube, Narek tells Soji that the security surveillance of her nighttime calls to her mom have revealed that the calls last for exactly 70 seconds every night. Soji says this is impossible. Later, Soji calls her mom, but starts to get drowsy again during the call. She tries to fight it off. I think she tries to stab herself in her hand, but her mom tells her to lie down and go to sleep, and she passes out. When she wakes up, she realises that something is wrong. She gets out all of her family mementos, loads of photographs and things like that, and then she scans them with this device to check their age, almost like kind of carbon dating. Everything she owns, including her lucky necklace, indicates from the scanning device a probable age of 37 months. On a technical note, this scanning device is nonsensical, like the past time period scanner thing that was used in episode 2. It's merely a magic light MacGuffin created simply to advance the plot, such as it is. The Lacerina arrives at the Borg cube and Picard alone beams on board. Once there, he begins to have flashbacks to his time as Locutus and his time with the Borg Queen. Soon after, he's greeted by Hugh, who gives him a hug and conveniently says, "I don't know what you're doing here, but I'll help you any way I can." That kind of tallies with their past association in the series, but nevertheless, it's still a plot convenience here. We get a major dollop of ham-fisted identity politics over the next several minutes, beginning when Hugh tells Picard ex-Borg drones have adopted a new name for themselves. They call themselves XBs, although we've never heard this used before. He says, "See if you can recognise the undercurrents here." He says, "A new name can be the first step to a new identity." Hugh shows Picard the Reclamation Project at work and explains that it operates to undo Borg assimilation of drones and somewhat restore them to their former pre-assimilation state. Picard says, "You're showing what the Borg are underneath. They're victims, not monsters." Hugh replies, "Still they remain the most hated people in the galaxy, just as helpless and enslaved as before. Only now our Queen is a Romulan." Picard adds, "Thank you for showing me this." Hugh finishes, "No one can understand it better than you, and the Picard who might advocate for free Borg. Now that would be quite a thing, wouldn't it?" All of this is classic 101 inclusion and diversity strategy inserted in script writing. It's purely identity politics, the promotion of the victim blame culture. In past Star Trek, this kind of message was there, but it was presented in such eloquent, subtle and thought-provoking ways. It's none of those things today, the way it's put across. Picard tells Hugh he's looking for Soji. Hugh says that she must be in danger, but he thinks that this is just based on nothing more than a hunch. He says something about you coming this far to this place, something about the dashing young Romulan spy who turned up 2 weeks ago pretending to not be asking questions about her. The dashing young Romulan spy, presumably that's Narek. We're being told now that he's dashing. Hugh says he will take Picard to meet Soji. Soji, meanwhile, tells Narek that nothing she owns is older than 37 months. She says it seems that everything about her has been fabricated. Narek suggests that she may have had implanted false memories by somebody, hoping to use her to find or obtain something. As he puts it, altered memories to conceal their purpose even from you. He conveniently suggests using a taboo to non-Romulans anyway, meditation technique to help her unlock her true memories, specifically her dreams, and bring them to the surface. Narek takes her to a private meditation chamber with Romulan markings on the floor once again, a convenient plot device. The Romulan guard throws a xenophobic slur at her, calling her round ears, but Narek quickly intimidates him, and the pair enter the chamber. They talk about their true selves, and we have some more feelings in hallways style trait dialogue here. Soji begins to access the dream, where she's a child looking for her dad. On a security monitor, Rizzo is watching Soji and Narek. In her dream state, Soji finally gets past the doorway of her father's workshop. Hugh and Picard arrive at Soji's quarters, but she's gone, another plot convenience. Hugh uses a scanner device to find her location, but it says she's not on the Borg cube. Picard wonders if somebody is concealing her. In her dream state, Soji enters the workshop but cannot see her father's face. However, she's able to see the work he's doing, and she sees herself laid out on the work table in wooden pieces. Soji says, "I'm a doll." It would be remiss here if I didn't point out that Kurtzman and the rest of the JJ Brigade love this kind of symbolism. They use it quite a bit in their media output. For a broader perspective on this symbolism, how it connects with writers and producers from the JJ Brigade, please check out the chapters that I've written about J.J. Abrams, Disney, Lost, Fringe, the themes of mind control and trauma dissociation that I've documented in my books Science Fiction and the Hidden Global Agenda Volumes 1 and 2. Hopefully you'll get some real insight from that there. But back to the episode. Soji looks up through the skylight in her dream and sees 2 blood-red moons and a constant electrical storm in the atmosphere. Rizzo tells Narek through a hidden earpiece that this could identify Soji's original homeworld. Soji asks Narek what it means, and he says that it means that she's found her home. He then says to her, "You're not real, you never were." He says goodbye, and he leaves her locked in the chamber with his favourite toy, which was established earlier in the episode, the Impossible Box, the same Impossible Box as the episode title. More commonly, it's known as the J.J. Kurtzman Mystery Box. The box opens, and it releases a red mist that's intended to kill Soji. This seems to activate her superpower type thing. It causes her to rather laughably and implausibly start ripping through the floor with her bare hands. Surely a Borg cube structure is made of metal, but here in this room it's made of wood. Why wood? In any case, she rips through it like cardboard. Even if she could rip through wood like this, she also seems to rip her way through the floors and ceilings of several number of levels below her, so presumably they were made of metal, but that's not an issue for her. How is it not an issue for her? My brain was hurting at this point, so I don't know. As the mist is about to envelop her, she jumps through the hole in the floor and she's made it out. Hugh and Picard now suddenly seem to be able to locate Soji on their scanner. Why they couldn't locate her before is anybody's guess. Picard says she's been activated, although how would he know this? Once again, anybody's guess. Is he psychic to cybernetic activation? Another little niggly point here. What is this activation thing all about? What does it even mean? What is going on in Soji's body? What does it allow her to do? How is it even plausible? Nothing is explained. Seconds later, Soji descends through the ceiling above to where Picard and Hugh are standing. All very convenient that they're now in the same location, that Soji knew exactly where they were. Picard tells Soji about Dahj coming to see him, and he shows her Dahj's necklace. Soji asks him if he knows what's happening to her, to which he replies yes. That is sort of a lie, because he only vaguely knows what's really going on. He certainly doesn't know the bigger picture yet. But then again, neither does the viewer, so at least the writer's bad plotting is consistent here. In any case, this seems to be enough reassurance for Soji, who goes with Picard, who's a stranger she's only just met, and also with Hugh, although she does know who Hugh is. Hugh learns that they are being pursued by Romulan security forces, so they conveniently retreat into the Borg Queen's cell. Hugh says that these were her quarters and that she had a spatial projector in the quarters. The same spatial projector that was acquired from the Sicarian race when the Borg assimilated them. As the trajector is a long-range transporter, Picard tells Rios that to take the Lacerina and rendezvous with Picard and Soji on the planet Nepenthe. From here, the episode, it's already going totally loopy, but it really does go into bomb pop territory. I'll explain why in a moment, but let's first just finish the last little bits of the plot. The Romulans suddenly appear out of nowhere. They've surrounded Picard, Hugh, and Soji. Soji seems to be totally ineffective again at this point. Where have her super-duper activation powers gone? Miraculously, Elnor appears, again seemingly out of nowhere. He slices and dices a few more Romulans. I don't think he decapitated any of them this time. It was more across the shoulders and the arms and things like that. Hugh says that he will forestall the next batch of approaching Romulans while they escape through the trajector. Elnor then says that he's going to stay behind with Hugh, who he's only just met by the way and doesn't know him from the proverbial Adam, to hold off the Romulans. Picard and Elnor then argue about the oath bond type thing that they made in episode 4, but it doesn't seem to matter now because Picard casually says he releases him from it. The next thing we know, the trajector is conveniently fully powered, and Picard and Soji step through it. Hugh and Elnor now seem to be behind a door with Romulans, and we hear Elnor telling them, "Please, my friends, choose to live." And that's where the episode ends. The last 2 or 3 minutes of this episode are absolutely baffling. It seems to be a patchwork of rapidly edited, badly paced scenes from different takes that don't match up with each other. It's almost like you're watching something with key scenes and dialogue missing. In fact, if I didn't know any better, I'd say that some of this came off the cutting room floor or was part of some kind of bad reshoot. Things just seem to suddenly happen for no apparent reason. The biggest culprit here is Elnor's bizarre, nonsensical and inexplicable ta-da appearance. How did he get on board? How did he not set off any alarms? Does anybody on the Lacerina know he beamed over there? It seemed that they didn't, in which case, who beamed him over there? Did Elnor beam himself over there? Does he know how to use transporter technology? The Borg cube also has a visible shield around it, so how did he beam through that? It also seems clear that both he and Hugh could have quite readily gone through the trajectory with Picard and Soji, but their reasons for not going don't seem to make an ounce of sense. It's all gaping plot holes and totally unanswered questions. There are reported rumours that the production of this show somewhat went off the rails around episode 7 with major writing and production issues. If that's true, maybe the climax of episode 6 marks the start of those issues. It's a shame because the story in this episode was, such as it is, a little bit tighter than previous episodes. Maybe I'm being biased by the fact of how much I disliked the previous 2 episodes and because this just wasn't as bad. But at least until the last few minutes of the episode anyway, that's where it all seemed to go all over the place. All of a sudden it felt like I was watching Star Trek Discovery Season 2 finale, Such Sweet Sorrow, all over again. Heaven forbid that I should have to relive that trauma once again. Thankfully we only have 2 or 3 minutes worth of nonsense here. So what did I make of the Impossible Box? Well, it was impossible really. It was soap dish dialogue with Soji and Narek, but that was pretty brief. When it cropped up, it wasn't quite as painfully cringeworthy compared to the previous episodes. More like a minor, mild cringe here. There was some mighty identity politics and tub thumping, but they were very brief actually. They're mercifully very brief for an episode of Picard. When it was there, it was quite fleeting. It was a hard hit for a moment or two, and then it was just gone, never to be seen for the rest of the episode. Also, unless I missed it, I don't think I caught any swearing or standout uses of contemporary slang or terminology in this episode. I may need to rewatch it to confirm this though. I think this episode benefited from a limited amount of time with the La Serena crew. Particularly noteworthy here was the blessedly largely absent Girardi from this episode. It's a definite plus here for me. I'd even go as far as to say that this series would be a tad more watchable if the character wasn't even in it, which is a controversial remark for some people, I know, but there you go. As a viewer, I'm entitled to my own opinion as much as anybody else's. Putting Picard on the Borg cube with Hugh also made a huge difference to the dynamic of this episode. It was nice to see them reunited again after their encounters in Star Trek The Next Generation. I also really enjoyed the callback to the Season 1 Voyager episode Prime Factors, which is an episode that I really like with the whole spatial trajector technology, although it was a bit shit finding out that the Sicarians have now been assimilated by the Borg. It's not quite as canon bashing as the kind of thing we've had of late in the series. It did get me wondering though about the reaction of the Sicarians to being assimilated. Not at all pleasurable. So this is an episode that shifted the focus onto that promising kernel of a story idea that's been hinted at since episode 1. I'm still curious to find out what the Romulans are up to, what role the Borg are going to play in all of this, what role Bruce Maddox played in it, what he created. Granted, this episode barely moved the story forward, rather it brought the characters up to speed with what the viewers have known for several episodes already, but it has moved things forward a little bit. It's got Soji off the Borg cube and away from Narek, at least for now. Is this episode an improvement for the series? I would say so, but it's like asking somebody what their least bad food choice is, if that makes sense. They're all bad, but it's just that there are others that are much worse. And that's how I view these last few episodes. Can I call this a good episode? Well, no. Can I say that I like it? No, not really. But was it as bad as the previous installments? That too is a no. No, it wasn't as bad. I'm going to give this episode a 3 out of 10. And that's it for now. I hope you've enjoyed these reviews. If you have, please remember to show your support by hitting the thumbs up and sharing the link. If you enjoy the channel, please consider subscribing as well as clicking the bell for notification of new content. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.